So if you're new to the hobby, it's pretty difficult to decipher all these numbers and acronyms in the FPV community. I know I had my challenges at first as well. So today we're going to go over all the specifications and break down what each number means and decipher if it's beneficial to you or not in these situations. And we're going to start here with the drone, the main star here. This is the TinyHawk III. This is the third iteration of this drone. EMAX have made 2 other versions of this. And the big thing to notice here is the construction of this. This is injected molded plastic. And the big thing here is that EMAX has identified that they have increased all the weak points of the previous drone. And injected molded plastic isn't a bad thing. These things, as you can see, is very flexible and it's good for a first-time pilot. So you should not be afraid to fly this thing in any way, shape, or form. If you hit a wall or anything for that matter, it's just gonna bounce off. And these propellers, although they spin pretty fast, and we'll talk about that later, they are protected by these bumper here or these prop guards. As far as the weight of this drone, it's pretty light. This thing weighs 32 grams without the battery. And with the battery, it can vary obviously depending on the type of battery that you put on here. So in the eyes of the FAA, this thing is pretty much a toy and you don't have to register it. That's a good thing about this weight. Now, the lighter the drone, the more efficient it's gonna be. You're gonna have longer flight times. And sometimes you can have more power. Power to weight ratio is a big thing. Now the downside to a lightweight drone is that it can be tossed around pretty easily or affected easily by external factors like the weather or wind. So if you want to fly indoors and it's windy, maybe you have your air conditioner on, or maybe you have a fan on in the room, then it might be greatly affected by just any external factors. So now this is considered a 76mm drone, and that's from motor post to motor post. And usually the bigger the number, the bigger the drone. And that's not really a big deal. This is pretty much the typical or average size of a beginner drone. So that's a pretty good size here. Moving on here, we have the camera. It's the first thing you see here, this thing pointing up on this canopy. This is the Runcam Nano 4, a pretty cool camera. And the big thing here is that it is fully adjustable. Now, we talked about this earlier in our unboxing video, and this thing can tilt either pretty much level or 90 degrees, or you can increase the pitch more and more. And that's really important in a starter drone. If you're gonna fly your first flight or fly indoors, it's pretty good to have this thing straight forward so you can fly really slow and gingerly, and the camera is gonna be pointing straight out. So that's a really cool touch because some of the other RTF kits have a fixed angle and you're forced into flying faster, or maybe it's too low and now you can't fly as fast as you want to fly. So this is a pretty cool touch, having good adjustability in the camera. Okay, so talking about the camera here, we also have something called the VTX. The VTX is the module that transmits your signal from your camera to your goggles, therefore you can see it. And this drone here is pretty cool. So this one has a maximum of 200 milliwatts. It is adjustable, so you can go from 50 to 100 to 200 milliwatts. And the higher the power, the further you can fly and still receive a video signal. I've flown some other drones with 200 milliwatts and I can get around 300 meters, which is around 3 or 4 football fields. So you probably don't want to fly that far in the first place, but the fact that it can do it, it's a really cool touch. Okay, so let's move on to the powertrain. We have these motors on here. There's no markings on here, but these are the 0802 motors. These are the 15,000 kV motors. Now, the first number, 802, that's the size of the motors. Usually the bigger the number, the larger the motors and therefore more torque. And the 15,000 kV is how fast the motors can spin. Now that doesn't essentially mean that the drone can fly faster, it just means it spins faster. There's a lot of factors as far as prop size, prop pitch, that can affect your thrust for each drone. Talking about the motors, this is a pretty cool touch here. EMAX has changed this drone for the third iteration where we have now plug-in motors. No drone is immune to this. Sometimes you might fly and crash your drone, or you know one motor might get too hot and fail. And it's a good thing. You can obviously change these motors. You have 3 screws on top. You can unscrew them and then change the motors. The good thing about this drone is that you can just simply unplug the motor from the flight control board and then screw your new motor on here and then just plug it back in. Okay, so we talked about the flight controller and the motors being plugged into the flight controller. The flight controller is pretty much a board. It's pretty much the heart of this drone. It houses all the accelerometers, all the processors in here. And this one has a F4 processor. Now, F4 is pretty good. That's pretty decent for this type of drone. You also have an F7 processor, and pretty much just like a processor in your computer, The higher the number, the more information it can process. It can process the information faster, and the more features you can add to your drone. Now, Betaflight is the firmware on this, and that lets you interface and let you change parameters on this drone. The flight controller here is pretty special as well. We also have ESCs in here. These are the things that regulate the speed and rotation of the motors. This flight controller is an all-in-one. It has a 5 amp ESC. 5 amp is not a high number, but usually the higher the number, the more current can flow to your motors and provide torque to spin these things up. The last thing we want to talk about here in this drone is the receiver. This is the SPI receiver. D8, D16 is a pretty common protocol, which is very good, so you can use other remotes on this drone. The range is adequate, and it's a pretty cheap to make or cheap protocol, so it's readily available, and it should be able to bind to multiple radios if you do want to upgrade in the future to another radio. All right, talking about radios, we have our E8 radio right here. This is the E8 radio by EMAX, and it is, in my opinion, for a first-time controller, it's pretty impressive. It feels the part, it feels good. You have these gimbals here, full-size gimbals. Now, this is an 8-channel radio. Our 8-channel radio just means that you have a specific function for each channel. So, for example, you might have throttle or yaw or bank as one channel. You might have one of these switches for another channel, another switch here for another channel. You have 8 channels, so you have a lot of features on here. Another thing about this controller is this little mount here. We talked about this in the unboxing, where you can take your goggles and put it on here, and it can be used as a monitor. That's pretty awesome in a RTF kit. All right, as far as the back here, we have an 18650 battery. Pretty cool. It's already installed in here. I just want to take a look at it because these batteries really don't have any specific tabs, so the polarity is really important. And it has been installed correctly, so we'll just put it back in here. Coming to the bottom here, you have 2 ports. One here is for a trainer port where you can train someone, or if you want to learn, someone can connect their control to yours. And the second port here is a micro USB port, and that's used obviously for charging the battery in here, which is good, and also for interfacing with your computer. Why is that important, guys? That is super important only because if you don't know how to fly an FPV drone yet, you can connect this to your computer, download a sim on your computer, and practice. Get a feel for it, do some crash landings, do some takeoffs, some loops, and you're not jeopardizing or damaging your drone. You're doing everything virtually, and it's pretty realistic, guys. If you can fly on the sim, most likely you can fly in real life. So I highly recommend, I really highly recommend that you spend some time in the sim. I'll probably leave some links down below for some of the popular simulators on the market, but you're better off crashing in the sim than crashing in real life. All right, let's move on to the goggles, which is probably where a lot of your money is being put into this RTF kit. This here is the Transporter 2 goggles by EMAX. This is a box style goggles. You also have other traditional low slim goggles. You also have digital goggles. Pretty cool. This uses a 5.8 gigahertz frequency range, and that just means that it interfaces with the VTX in here. So it's also a 5.8 gigahertz transmitter, and it goes back and forth and sends the signal from your camera to your goggles so you can see where you're flying. Having said that, the downside to box goggles is, as I said, the form factor. It doesn't look as cool as some of the slimmer profile ones, but the bigger thing is that they're not compatible usually with people who wear glasses. In my case, I do wear glasses, as you can see, and yeah, that's not gonna work. Unless you have some really, really narrow glasses, box style goggles probably isn't gonna work. So what's some options here? Well, for me personally, I don't fly with glasses to begin with anyways. I am nearsighted, so I can put these on and probably see well. Now, also to aid with that, because people who have some mild prescription might be able to see without glasses, and they have adjustable notches on here or diopters where this can move further or back to adjust your focal length. So we can just pull this out and it goes up to a certain tab. Really nice setup. I'm also impressed with the padding on here. I don't know how long this padding is gonna last and how it's gonna feel, but for right now, initially, it's okay. Now, every face is different, so you can't expect a perfect fit. Now, the best thing about this goggles here is this plate right here, the actual screen, and it is detachable. It's held down by magnets, and if you do have the issue I spoke about earlier about not being able to see, maybe your glasses can't fit in here, well, you can take this out and fly that way. Obviously, you don't want to hold it and then fly with one hand, so that's why you have this screw mount on here and you can just screw this on, and now you have a screen in your radio. And this is more reminiscent of your traditional camera drones where you have a controller and maybe have a monitor below or on top of your controller or your radio. And I've never done this. It's been a while since I've flown a camera drone, but this is pretty sleek, guys. Beyond this whole thing having diversity antennas and it's detachable, you also have some controls on here, and we'll talk about that in the setup, but just remember, this also has a built-in DVR. It's a pretty cool feature where you can put an SD card in here and record your flights. And why is that useful? In case you do crash your drone, you want to find where it's at, you can just replay it and see where you crashed your drone. All right, so last but not least, let's talk about the power here, the battery. Now, this drone here uses a 1S battery. And 1S just means the cells. This is a 1-cell battery. If you fly bigger, faster, high performance drones, you might see a 2S, 3S, 4S, maybe even a 6S battery. Now that's pretty cool. This one here uses a 1S battery. It has a pH 2.0 connector. So if you do want to buy more batteries, and I do suggest you buy more batteries because although it's included with one, you know, FPV drones fly a little bit different than camera drones. Camera drones, you can get around 10 to 20 to 30 minutes of flight time. FPV, 5 minutes maybe. So it's good to have multiple batteries to increase your flying session. Besides that, this one here, as I said before, has a pH 2.0, so make sure when you buy some other batteries, it does have this connection on here. This one here is a 450 milliamp hour battery, and that's just the capacity of it. In my opinion, make sure you get a capacity close to 450, maybe a little bit higher if you can. Just make sure the dimensions are the same, because if this battery gets too big, it probably won't fit in your tray down here on your drone. The good thing about this is that these batteries aren't too expensive, so yeah, go get 5, 6, 7 batteries and just charge them up. And talking about charging, you have your included charger in here. Pretty awesome, guys. There's some warnings on here, and you have a switch. That's the first thing. Make sure you're using the high voltage for these. You just plug this into a USB-C, plug or outlet. You can even use a battery bank if you're in the field, and this thing will charge pretty fast. But yeah, it's pretty cool that they have this included in the box. All right, guys, that's it for all the specifications on this RTF kit. I know there was a lot spoken here, a lot covered, but hopefully you can understand what these numbers and acronym means when you hear about VTX, when you hear about FC or flight controllers or EFCs, when you see numbers like this, 450 milliamp or maybe 5.8 gigahertz, you understand now what these things mean. Yes, hopefully all the specs and all this information did help you. If you have any questions about this system here or anything I talked about today, yeah, leave those questions down below. I'll be happy to answer those. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. Therefore, you'll be notified whenever I do drop a new FPV video. Because right after this, I'll be making a setup and first flight video. We're gonna set this whole thing up and then go outside for our first flight. So you do wanna be subscribed when I do drop that video. So anyways, thanks for watching, and I will see you in that next video. Peace.